Okay, thank you very much, Biarte. I will digress just very briefly because our ambassador has a busy evening. I would like him to make a few remarks before he leaves, and then we'll come back to Susan's observation of the situation leading up to the 2007 violence. So I will just make a brief introduction of our ambassador, and then he'll come and say hello to everybody. Our ambassador, His Excellency Elkanah Odembo, has been the ambassador of the Republic of Kenya to the US for, I think, just a little over a year now. But before that, he was our ambassador to France. Before joining diplomatic service, Ambassador Odembo was very active in the civil society sector in Kenya, where he founded and directed the Ufadhili Trust. This is a philanthropy and social responsibility center which seeks to promote the spirit of giving, philanthropy, and the use of local resources to improve people's lives through cooperative social responsibility, cross-sector partnership, technical assistance, and policy research. Before founding Ufadhili, Ambassador Odembo was involved in other civil society activities, including working as a consultant for the Ford Foundation's coordinator of African Philanthropy Initiative. He also worked for the East African World Neighbors, and he was a research officer for the African Medical Research Foundation. His Excellency Ambassador Odembo has also received a couple of awards, including the Senagos Senior Fellows and the African Leadership Initiative Award. His Excellency Ambassador Odembo has a bachelor's degree in biology and sociology from Baldwin College and a master's degree in community health, focusing on epidemiology from the University of Texas. I would like to invite His Excellency the Ambassador now to say hello to the gathering.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. I'm sorry that I had, I think, scheduled too many things in one evening. I just arrived this afternoon from Washington, so I shouldn't have allowed myself to commit to so many things. But I was sitting here listening to the conversation that is going on, and I'm saying, isn't this nice? Shouldn't this have taken place with all Kenyans in Minnesota in attendance? Because some of what is being said here was in the report. You remember immediately after the elections, we had the judge from South Africa, Krigler, who did a very extensive report, which we refer to as the Krigler report. And then there was the subsequent work by Justice Waki, which we have come to know as the Waki report. But I also like the way you have walked us from pre-independence to post-independence, and the different stages that we have gone through that can give you some indication of where we're coming from and where we are now. And to some extent, it tells you what we need to do. If you listen very carefully to what has just been said here, what needs to be done, what Kenyans need to do, comes out fairly clearly in the conversation that is going on here. And my wish and my prayer and the time that I've been here as ambassador is that, because this year, as a result of this, the new constitution that has been talked about, for the first time, Kenyans living abroad, overseas, will be able to vote. The constitution says that this will be done in a progressive manner. But the Electoral Commission has already identified the 12 countries in which or where Kenyans will be able to vote. And the USA is on top of that list, because out of the 3 or so million Kenyans who live outside of Kenya, almost 500,000 of them live in the United States of America. This is by far, the largest diaspora that Kenya has. But this, again, looking forward in terms of where we are going, all those things that are taking place in Kenya, I think to a large extent are moving us in the right direction. There are things that are happening. Institutions have been created or are being created. Laws have been enacted, wonderful. Systems are being established. It's not all there yet. We are not quite there yet. But there are many, many things that are taking place. And perhaps the election of March, if you ask me, I will say, Kenyans, our expectations are very high in terms of what we expected. What I see as a challenge that we need to manage. Very, very high expectations. The amount of time that we have to put it all together, I think is still, even if you put it at March, is not going to be enough. All the new administrative procedures, the technologies that are going to be applied, also fairly new. All that needs to be put in place. But we have seen from the by-elections and the referendum what was then the interim electoral commission was able to do. So we do have a feeling of a good sense of what can happen. I think it looks fairly hopeful. But there is so much work that we need to do between now and then. All those various institutions, political parties, I'm glad you're talking about them. It's a big challenge for us. But in terms of the things that led us to the post-election violence in 2007, 2008, a lot of that we've now managed. The lack of an independent electoral commission. We had an electoral commission that was handpicked by the executive, single-handed. That was a big part of the problem. We had an election that was closely contested, and you had one party, the aggrieved party in the contest, feeling like there was no recourse. There was no court to go to. Why? Because the entire Court of Appeal were individuals, judges, who were handpicked by the executive. Okay? That has changed. We have an electoral commission that has been put in place quite competitively and is quite independent. We have a judiciary that is undergoing major reforms, and that's a big deal. A judiciary that is undergoing major reforms. Just 2 weeks ago, 4 out of 9 judges from the Court of Appeal were shown the door. And now we're moving downwards to the magistrates. A whole bunch of them are going to be shown the door. Those are the institutions that I see that we have put in place here that make me fairly confident that, yes, as much as there are still tensions around the country, there are issues pending in the ICC and tensions around the ICC, which we haven't touched on here, and the potential for. There was a report by Civil Society Network, CRECO, that came out just 2 weeks ago that says in the 47 counties, we've devolved into 47 counties, in 24 of those, there is still potential. There is some tension and there's potential for violence. These are dangerous signs, but these are things that we can see now ahead of us. The police reforms. The whole police service is undergoing reforms. The police were a big part of the problem in the elections of 2007. That whole police force is being revised, is being reformed into a police service with a civilian oversight authority. That gives me hope that, again, there's a very good possibility that we will have a number of institutions in place that will make sure that we don't go back to where we were in 2007. Where I still have some issues, where I think we need to work really hard, the land issue, the issue of people who feel they are on the margins. The land issue is still pending. We have a new constitution, chapter 4. Chapter 5 of the constitution is on land and the environment. Very solid, very progressive. We have a land policy that has passed through the cabinet, but we still haven't done what we need to do with regard to the land issue. So the land issue is still a hot one. It is going to come back to haunt us. And I'm not sure how that is going to be dealt with. As you know, there's still people in the internally displaced persons in camps, IDP camps. But by and large, the government has done a fairly decent job in settling people so that you have people who are still in camps, yes, but a lot of those people who are still in camps today are people who are landless to start with. These are not people who are not able to go back home. These are people who are landless to start with. And we have a lot of landless people. We have a lot of very young people, very angry young people who feel they have no stake in the system. So there are issues around poverty and the wealth that is not being shared equitably, that makes some young people, and I saw them in 2007, 2008, I went to places, I met young men who had been paid 200 shillings, which is how many dollars? Half a dollar, to cut off somebody's arm. And they say, you know, 200 shillings, I cut off somebody's arm because what do I have to lose? Nothing to lose. So too many young people who feel they don't have a stake in the system is also going to be a big problem for us. And that is something that we need to work on. But I think very importantly, the two principals who were the contestants in the 2007 election, because remember, it wasn't just about an election that went bad. The elections were going quite well, actually, until when it came to the point of announcing the presidential results. And that's where I think that's where the rain started beating us. And so the two principals, I think, still have a responsibility to work extremely hard. They've kept the coalition together, but again, it's a coalition of coalitions of coalitions. And now with the registrar of parties registering new parties now, we're going to see some interesting things happening with parties also. But I think the responsibility of shepherding the country towards peaceful elections in 2013, the two principals, the president and the prime minister, must really see that responsibility as the most important responsibility that they have in their political careers. One is on their way out, one is looking to become president. Either way, the two of them have a major stake in what happens in Kenya. So again, my prayer, the Oslo Center, thank you very much for organizing this, and I hope this is just the beginning of a process, because we need to continue having these discussions all the time. We need people who are observing from outside, who can tell us, this is what I'm seeing. tell me if this is the case. You need to play things back to us, but we need to have this room full of Kenyans, because Kenyans are the ones who need to be having this conversation. And Kenyans in America, and for those of you who are Kenyans, because I don't know who is Kenyan and who isn't in this room here, because Kenyans in America are not having this conversation. And I can sense from where I sit that temperatures are beginning to go up already. And because Kenyans here will this time be able to vote, the stakes are going to be even higher. And it will really be very unfortunate if Kenyans living abroad, Kenyans particularly in the United States, don't do better than what happened in 2007. And the only way to get around it is to be able to sit down and look each other in the eye and say, this is what happened. This is what is going on in the country. Where are we? What is our responsibilities as Kenyans living in the United States? So I'm looking forward to continued discussions. I know Susan is in Washington, so perhaps we will, together with the World Peace Institute and the American University, have this. I love, Chairman, your background information and walking us through that, because that's what people need to hear so that people internalize and appreciate the context within which things are happening. And I'm hopeful. I know we can overcome. And Kenyans in the U.S. have a responsibility. So all of you who are Kenyans, wangapi wa Kenya wako hapa? Huh? Yeah, so we do have a job. We do have a job. Everybody else can only support us. Everybody else feels so strongly about Kenya. And Kenyans didn't appreciate just how important and how central we are as a country in the region and on the continent until 2007, the beginning of 2008. Within 2 months of the post-election violence, everything ground to us. Complete standstill in Uganda, in Rwanda, in Burundi, in Tanzania. Because Kenya is a hub, a financial hub, a communication and transport hub, you name it. And the rest of the world came in and said, Kenya cannot be allowed to go in. But we must take that responsibility more seriously ourselves, because we owe it to ourselves and our children and our grandchildren to make sure that we don't ever go back to the situation that we went to 2007, 2008. Thank you. Thank you so much. Sorry I have to run. The conversation continues.
One thing, those of you who associate with Kenyans in particular and East Africans and Africans in general, you probably have observed that when a political discussion gets going, it's very difficult to end. So let me have Susan make a few remarks about the prelude to the 2007 violence, and then we will combine the remaining 2 or 3 segments and just briefly make our comments so we can have a chance for a Q&A session.
I'm just suggesting that we go straight to Q&A since we've had some wonderful presentations. You want perhaps a very quick bit about inflammatory speech? I'll just tell you why Kenya is such an interesting country for studying and observing this particular topic, and bring us up to the present moment in that regard. So the ambassador mentioned the ICC, that's the International Criminal Court. The International Criminal Court has opened, conducted an extensive investigation into the post-election violence, and the then prosecutor of the International Criminal Court named 6 Kenyans, including a radio broadcaster, and including 2 Kenyans who are likely to be presidential candidates. So already you can see that this is complicating the situation quite a bit. In summoning the Kenyan accused to The Hague, where the International Criminal Court is located, The chief judge on the panel of the ICC warned the Kenyans explicitly about inflammatory speech and told them to watch what they say, otherwise she might consider ordering their arrest. So there is quite a bit of awareness, both from on the part of non-Kenyans and also on the part of Kenyans, about this issue of inflammatory speech, to the point that this International Criminal Court judge has raised the topic and arguably already had some impact on the level and tone of discourse inside Kenya. On the inside as well, on the national level, since 2008, there is a new institution in Kenya called the National Cohesion and Integration Commission, which has been made permanent and statutory by the new constitution. This commission has the simple, easy little task of bringing about national cohesion in a country that has, depending on who's counting, 42 or 43 distinct ethnic groups, many of them with distinct languages of their own, and many with long-standing grievances one against another. So that National Cohesion and Integration Commission has also singled out this issue of speech and has begun to make efforts to combat inflammatory speech, including ordering the arrest of several public figures during the last campaign. That was the campaign leading toward the constitutional referendum in 2010. Kenya has been, let's say, attempting various different ways of limiting inflammatory speech, some of them perhaps a bit strong, like arresting public figures in the midst of a political campaign. At the moment, it's safe to say that the level of public discourse is not nearly as inflammatory as it was in the months just before the last election. But of course, we still have some months to go until the next election, so we will be watching closely to see what happens in these upcoming months, which undoubtedly will be quite key. So I will leave my own remarks at that because time is running out, and invite your questions now.
Thank you very much, Susan and Bartel, for those insightful remarks. We will take a couple of questions from the audience. In the interest of time, I would suggest that we ask a question at a time, and if you could make your question as brief as possible, we'll really appreciate it. We have 2 mics in the audience, so if you have a question, just raise your hand and you'll be given a microphone.
OSLO is not known for inflammatory speech, but on the 22nd of July last year, there was a murderous eruption where 79 innocent people were killed, and the speech was here written, and it was written in media that was accessible to anyone, but whether they did access it or not is hard to say. And I was wondering, is there a danger that that kind of silent communication could erupt in Kenya as well?
Yes, it's always difficult to measure causation. In other words, to know clearly to what extent inflammatory speech actually has brought about a violent reaction. This is difficult to measure when an individual reacts, as in the tragic case that you described, or as in the case of Jared Lochner, the young man who opened fire on Representative Giffords and others in an event that killed not as many people, but in some ways was perhaps analogous, because in both cases there we're talking about individuals evidently with mental illness who may have been affected by a climate of inflammatory speech. I would perhaps distinguish those two cases from a situation in which there is a society that is more vulnerable for a whole series of reasons, so that a climate of inflammatory speech may have an effect on the conduct of a larger number of people, as was the case in Kenya in 2007 and 2008. So in a situation like that, or in Rwanda, for example, in the years leading up to the genocide, when again there was a radio station that broadcast systematic, increasing campaign of inflammatory speech, it is easier to show a connection between that kind of very widespread, insistent, continuing inflammatory speech that is, if you like, falling on more fertile, even more fertile ground, to draw a connection between that and a real social upheaval, such as took place in Rwanda or on a smaller scale in Kenya in 2008. I'm not sure if I've answered your question properly, though. Yes?
Okay, we'll take another question.
Do you think social media can play the same role as inflammatory speeches?
Yes. In fact, quite a bit of inflammatory speech was transmitted in Kenya in 2007 on the web and even by SMS. And we also have a number of examples from other countries in which, for example, riots have been organized over SMS. This was a topic of particular concern. As I've said, in Kenya there was a website called Mashada, which was organized originally as a forum for political dialogue, but it became such a flashpoint for increasingly stomach-turning, racist, violent kind of rhetoric that the people who had put it up originally, intending it as a space for dialogue, instead shut it down. And some of those same people are just launching a new project now, quite innovative, brand new, path-breaking project to monitor inflammatory speech on blogs, on the web, and even on SMS in Kenya, or in Kenyan cyberspace, I can say. So this is a reflection of our awareness that's not only a factor, but an increasingly important factor. Why? Because people are communicating more and more in that way, as we all know. Especially young people who tend to take a disproportionate role in carrying out violence.
Yeah, may I also quickly add that especially texts played a major role in inflaming feelings during after the 2007 elections, in the sense that where there was conspiracy to delay results, for example, until the right person was declared the winner, texts would be sent ahead of time to indicate that so-and-so is the genuine winner in this constituency or in this ward, which means when the Electoral Commission of Kenya announced a person other than the one who had been mentioned in the texts, then that provoked the supporters of the person who had initially been indicated as the winner. So the social media worked both ways, for good and for bad reasons.
One issue that I haven't brought up for lack of time is that it's important to study possible ways. I made reference to interfering with the process of inflaming passions in a society by means of speech. So that begs the question, how could one interfere in a way that wouldn't infringe on freedom of expression. And there are a number of different ways. We can look at different baskets of possible policy options. The first one would be silencing the speaker. You can imagine that for a free speech zealot like me, silencing the speaker is not a very good option. A second basket of options would be limiting dissemination, since freedom of expression gives us all the right to speak, but not necessarily an unlimited platform or unlimited mode of dissemination. A third option might be to work with the audience, the potential audience, so that the audience is less vulnerable to incitement. So looking at this second option, when we think about new media, there are conceivably options for limiting dissemination in careful and cabined ways. Just to give you one example, SMS blasting, namely sending one SMS to a large number of people at the same time, is one of the reasons why SMS is such an effective way of communicating very rapidly and very widely. When it's misused, then you can organize a riot very, very quickly if you can send your SMS to 10,000 people at the same time. So in certain circumstances, it might be an option to limit blasting so that you wouldn't shut down the entire internet as a number of governments have done, sometimes with the right sorts of objectives, and sometimes, I would say, with the wrong kinds of objectives. In other words, it's easy for a government to use pretexts to do something like shut down the internet, which is extremely speech repressive. An alternative might be, as I say, to limit blasting in certain specific circumstances so that dissemination wouldn't be as easy on such a broad scale or so quickly.
Okay, shall we take the next question?
Thanks for allowing us to ask questions. I was just wondering, what's the role of the media in this case? As we know, democracy thrives in informed citizens. Is there a way to inform the citizens about the proper channels of information so that way they won't get dissuaded by the rebel rousers or troublemakers in this case? And is there an objective media that the government could support or the civilians could support that would inform people about the election and the issues, real issues, and without inciting violence in this case?
So I referred to Kenya as a laboratory for efforts to limit inflammatory speech, and yet another method that is being tested extensively in Kenya is training journalists in the kind of reporting that might minimize conflict. There are many ideas about exactly how to do this. One possibility that has been experimented with in a number of other countries, Iraq, for example, is for journalists to get together and not only practicing journalists themselves, but even conceivably media owners, to come up with lists of phrases or words or language that are inflammatory in the context at the moment in the country in question, and then to make an agreement to avoid language which, by their collective understanding, is inflammatory. Another approach is to train journalists in what we might call ethical journalism, so that when they report on one side, for example, a politician on one side of a contest, that they also give the other opinion, the opposing side, so that their reporting is not biased. Or if they, a third possibility is to encourage journalists simply not to disseminate speeches by politicians which might well be inflammatory when digested by the audience. Particularly with this third approach, there are pros and cons, of course, because if a journalist is not disseminating speeches, inflammatory speeches by a given politician, that doesn't mean that the politician isn't still making those speeches. Just to give an example from another country, many years ago I was in France talking with newspaper editors who were really struggling over how much to disseminate the speeches of Jean-Marie Le Pen, a politician who said quite a lot of xenophobic and racist things. And so they said, if we report on what he says, then we may increase his support among the population. So we're helping his cause. But if we don't report, then we aren't covering this guy who does have real followers and is an important force in the country. So this is just to tell you that your question is very thought-provoking, and there isn't yet a very clear consensus on how the media should work to limit inflammatory speech. But in Kenya in particular, there are some very thoughtful people working on it and experimenting with it.
Okay, shall we take the last two or one question? The last question, okay.
I'd like to go back a little bit to what Orland said, and because he mentioned the impact on Eastern Africa, all of Africa, and the rest of the world if there's violence in Kenya, and especially look at neighboring countries, at places like South Sudan, Somalia, Eritrea, and what the effect of violence or the effect of no violence could have on those countries, how it would spill over the borders. And maybe this is also related to the media and the cell phone question, because it's so ubiquitous.
I will quickly respond to that. Susan, you want to go? Okay. Yeah, I will quickly respond to that by just mentioning Kenya is a regional hub. A lot of imports into Uganda go through Kenya. A lot of imports to Rwanda and Burundi and Eastern Congo, Southern Sudan, go through Kenya. Secondly, Kenya is home to a lot of international organizations, including UN agencies. We have at least 4 or 5 UN agencies with their headquarters in Nairobi. In addition, Kenya has been the refuge of people fleeing violence in Somalia, Southern Sudan, and a little while ago, Uganda. Kenya has also been the mediator for regional conflicts. You know, Sudan, eventually South Sudan, and then Somalia. Now, my point is, if things go wrong in Kenya, all these stakeholders will be affected. As the ambassador mentioned, just within 2 days after the 2007 violence broke out, Uganda had no fuel, Rwanda, Burundi had no fuel, and their economies were being crippled because of the violence in Kenya. So the point here is everybody has an interest in the stability of Kenya, in the non-violence of the forthcoming elections. Because if we have a recurrence of 2007, in 2013, most of us fear that it will be worse. And if it is worse, then all these neighboring countries, all these international organizations, all these UN agencies in Nairobi would be badly impacted. So it is really in the interest of everyone that these elections are conducted peacefully and they are viewed by everybody to be free and fair. Yeah. Do you have another question? Okay.
Yeah, I have a question. What is strategic planning from the government and the NGOs for the 2007 election should not repeat itself? And my other question to that is, are the youth being empowered to take part of the political system? They might have a stake to it and they might have an answer, because I see Kenya going through, the older generation are the leading ones, and the violence are being erupted by the younger generation. So it could be a two-way street that the youth should be more into the political system.
The role of the young people going forward is critical. And are they moving into the political space now? Are they moving in? Well, we could start looking at, are they moving into the political parties? Are they seeing the political parties as an avenue for participation and for being included and engaged? I'm sorry to report from my observation that we haven't really seen great increase in the youth participation in the political parties and in the political processes. It is true that the number of young people in the current August House, the current parliament, is increased from the previous. So there are more young representatives already in the parliament. But it doesn't really seem that young people are coming to the political parties to be involved. Can we do something? I think this is a golden opportunity for Kenya to include young people. One, for the reason that right now we also do have a new electoral system, including party lists. And as you know very well, there are even specific party lists for youth representatives. So youth representatives have now specific reserved seats in the legislative bodies. Secondly, unfortunately, we are still discussing elections in Kenya, focusing on the presidential election and the parliamentary election. But this is the election where we are also going to elect governors in the 47 counties, and not least the county assemblies, which is a great opportunity and avenue for young people and for the youth participation. But the political parties, unfortunately, has not focused on this yet. The information or the awareness in Kenya is not focusing on this, but this is something that we can still change, which would be a great opportunity for us to do. If we don't, young people are facing economic challenges because the economic situation in Kenya is not improving, to the contrary, and that is in particularly also a challenge for young people. The unemployment, as we know, has not gone down, to the contrary. So there are some signs here on the wall that, if not addressed and really looked into differently from what we have done up to now, in the next 3 to 4 to 5 months, there is some writing on the wall that might be very, very challenging going forward. So my brief answer is, unfortunately, I don't see that there are a lot of young people being engaged in the political dynamics and the political processes, but there are a lot of opportunities that is there for us to conquer.
Okay, thank you very much, I guess.
The young man who asked that question, Mohammed Yama, is truly one of the youth leaders in our community, and has participated with in the youth leadership roundtables that we've had when people from the State Department have come here. So we really appreciate his leadership. I think we have...
the only question I had was the different factions that took part in the troubles in 2007. Have they changed the dynamics? Have they changed? Is it still tribal? Are they still aligned to the players that were big players in 2007? Or are we seeing a shift in terms of their allegiances? Do they still exist, even the Madasha radio or media outlets? Are they basically the troublemakers? Are they still around, and have they changed? That's the only question I
have. What is changing? Are the troublemakers still around? I guess they are. Come again? Are they still prominent? Some of them are. Some of them are still there. Some of them are still prominent. But are there any changes? Well, I mentioned briefly the legal framework in which we should all operate, whether we are there and we are still prominent. The legal framework has changed, and it is changing. So that is one opportunity. Are the institutions changing? Well, all the political parties in Kenya, being stakeholders in an election, they had to comply with the new political party law by the 30th of April this year. And all the political parties have worked very hard to comply with the new requirements in the political parties legislation. So there is potential and now an opportunity that we might see slightly different political parties as institutions. Not overnight, but moving in a slightly positive and right direction, depending on how this can be followed up in the next few months. As an example, I mentioned one of the challenges was the party hopping in the very last minutes before the election 2007, which some of those you refer to, you could even see them moving around there. Can they do that in 2013? According to the new political party law, they cannot. You must be where you are for at least the last 3 months before an election. In other words, there cannot be any party hopping for the last 3 months before an election. Can they come up with a last-minute coalition arrangement? No, they cannot. Because again, the new legislation requires that for a pre-election coalition, you must have a very specific agreement that is in the 3rd schedule of the Political Parties Act, which must be with the office of the registrar 3 months before the election. So they are still there, they are still around, some of them, they are still prominent, some of them, but there are some differences and some changes if implemented. And that is, I think, the opportunity that we have to strengthen now the institutions so they can follow up, they can implement, they can enforce if necessary, and even sanction if need be. That is what we need to prepare for before we get there.
Just to add a word, you asked also whether people are still following those same leaders. And maybe this little word will synthesize also some of the rest of our conversations this evening. You know, traditionally in Kenya, since 1992, in this period of multi-party politics, people still voted according to their ethnicity as much as according to their political party. So they were encouraged by their leaders, you know, if you are a Luo, you vote this way. If you're a Kikuyu, you vote that way. You should vote for one of your own. And I was just in Kenya a couple of weeks ago and traveled out to the countryside, as I always try to do, and was talking with some remarkable women and youth. And they said, you know, they always come and they ask for our vote. This was, I was talking to people in a smaller ethnic group who have traditionally voted with the leader of a larger ethnic group. I won't mention which ones. And in any case, these women were saying, you know, those naming the larger ethnic group, they always come around and they ask for our vote. They say, you guys, you belong with us, you should vote with us. And one woman in particular, brilliant woman I was listening to, said, they come around only at election time to ask, you know, for us. They say, you are like us, you should side with us, you're with us. And then they forget about us during the period, you know, the long period in between one election and the next one. She said, this time we've gotten used to this fact that they only remember us when it's time to vote for them. She said, we're beginning to think a little differently. This time maybe we're going to vote for the other guy. So it seems to me this is really part of the development of democratic life, and there does seem to be some indication that people will not necessarily vote only for quote-unquote our own, but that they may, in this election, start voting outside those traditional blocs, and if so, that would shake up Kenyan politics on the inside, because it would be something of a wake-up call to political leaders, which can only be very, very salutary as well. And then I just wanted to add one final note, which is we've talked very glumly about how awful it would be if there were violence again in these elections, and what shockwaves it would spread around the region and so forth. I'd just like to point out that if Kenya can, we are all hoping so fervently, get through this next election peacefully, that would also send just as strong positive waves all over the region as, to the contrary, those positive waves would be at least as strong as the negative ones, is what I'm saying. Because then Kenya would really be presenting a very impressive and remarkable model of recovery to all the neighboring countries, and in fact to the world. So that's what we're very much hoping.